In the stillness of the night, when the world grows quiet, the shadows of the past whisper their secrets. Welcome to Shadows of the Past, where we unravel the chilling truths behind crimes that haunt the edges of memory. Tonight, Volume 37, we dive into 10 disturbing true crime stories, tales of betrayal, rage, and lives torn apart by darkness. Each case is a puzzle pieced together from the fragments of human lives where love turned to obsession and pain became violence. These are not just stories, they are warnings etched in blood, reminding us how fragile the line between order and chaos can be. As the rain falls softly outside, let these accounts pull you into a world where motives are murky and the truth is often more terrifying than fiction. Settle in, dim the lights, and let the black screen envelop you. But beware, these tales may linger long after the rain stops. Our first story takes us to a quiet town in California, where a child's cry for help masked a sinister truth. This is the murder of Layla Fowler. Part 1, the murder of Layla Fowler, Valley Springs, California, 2013. The year was 2013, and the small town of Valley Springs, California, nestled in the rolling hills of Calaveras County, felt like a place untouched by time. Families knew their neighbors, children played freely in the streets, and the golden sunsets painted a picture of serenity. But beneath this idyllic surface, a tragedy was brewing. One that would shatter the town's sense of safety and leave a family broken forever. This is the story of Layla Fowler, a vibrant 8-year-old girl whose life was stolen in a moment of unthinkable betrayal. Her death would not only devastate those who loved her, but also unravel a web of lies that pointed to a killer no one could have suspected. As we step into this case, prepare to question everything you think you know about trust, family, and the darkness that can hide in plain sight. It was April 27th, 2013, a warm Saturday afternoon. Layla Fowler, with her bright smile and boundless energy, was at home with her 12-year-old brother. Their parents were out attending a Little League game, leaving the siblings in the care of their older brother's watchful eye, or so they thought. The Fowler home, a modest single-story house on a quiet street, was filled with the usual sounds of a lazy weekend. The hum of the television, the chatter of children. Layla, known for her love of drawing and her infectious giggle, was likely in her room, lost in her own world. Her brother, a lanky boy on the cusp of adolescence, was elsewhere in the house, perhaps playing a video game or scrolling through his phone. To anyone passing by, it was just another ordinary day. But inside those walls, something was terribly wrong. At around 12:30 p.m., a frantic 911 called shattered the calm. The voice on the line was that of Layla's brother, his words tumbling out in a panic. "Someone broke into our house," he stammered. "They stabbed my sister. She's hurt bad. Please hurry." He described a terrifying scene. A stranger, a man with long gray hair, had burst into their home, attacked Layla, and fled into the woods behind the house. The operator tried to keep the boy calm, but his voice cracked with fear. "She's not moving," he whispered. "There's so much blood." Emergency responders raced to the scene, their sirens piercing the sleepy afternoon. The town, unaccustomed to such chaos, held its breath. When paramedics arrived at the Fowler home, they were met with a sight that would haunt them for years. Layla lay on the floor of her bedroom, her small body crumpled in a pool of blood. She had been stabbed multiple times. Over 20 wounds marred her chest, neck, and arms. The ferocity of the attack was staggering, each wound a testament to a rage that seemed almost inhuman. Her eyes, once sparkling with life, stared blankly at the ceiling. Despite their efforts, the paramedics knew it was too late. Layla Fowler was gone, her life extinguished before she'd even had a chance to grow up. The police secured the scene, their faces grim as they surveyed the carnage. A child had been murdered in her own home, and the hunt for her killer was on. The brothers' account of an intruder set off an immediate manhunt. Police fanned out across Valley Springs, combing the woods and knocking on doors. The description of a long-haired man in his 40s or 50s became the focus of their search. Flyers were posted, sketches circulated, and the community rallied in fear and anger. Schools went on lockdown, and parents clutched their children a little tighter. Who was this monster who could invade a home and slaughter an innocent girl? The media descended on Valley Springs, their cameras capturing the town's grief and the growing sense of unease. Layla's parents, devastated beyond words, appeared on television, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. "She was our angel," her mother sobbed. "Please help us find who did this." But as the hours turned into days, cracks began to appear in the story. The police, trained to look beyond the surface, started to notice inconsistencies. The brother's account, while emotional, didn't quite add up. He claimed the intruder had entered through the back door, but there were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows. The woods behind the house, where the suspect supposedly fled, showed no footprints, no discarded weapons, no evidence of a stranger's presence. Forensic teams scoured the crime scene collecting fingerprints, DNA, and blood samples. What they found, or rather what they didn't find, was telling. There was no trace of an outsider in the home. The only DNA present belonged to Layla, her brother, and other family members. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife from the Fowler's own drawer, was found hidden in the garage, wiped clean of prints, but stained with Layla's blood. Investigators turned their attention to the brother. At 12 years old, he was an unlikely suspect, but his story was unraveling. During follow-up interviews, his timeline shifted. He couldn't explain why he hadn't heard Layla scream or why he waited several minutes before calling 911, 1, and 11. His description of the intruder grew vague, the details changing with each retelling. Detectives, trained in reading body language, noted his fidgeting, his refusal to meet their eyes. There was something he wasn't saying, something buried beneath the tears and the trembling voice. They pressed gently, aware of his age but driven by the need for truth. "Tell us what really happened," one detective urged. "We're here to help you." What emerged was a story far darker than anyone could have imagined. The brother, whose name was withheld due to his juvenile status, confessed that there was no intruder. The long-haired man was a fabrication, a desperate attempt to cover his tracks. He had killed Layla himself. The motive was murky, rooted in the tangled emotions of a troubled child. According to his confession, he and Layla had argued that afternoon. Over what, he couldn't clearly articulate. Perhaps it was a sibling spat, the kind that flares up and fades just as quickly. But for the brother, something snapped. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen. His mind clouded by a rage he didn't fully understand. He followed Layla to her room, and in a moment of uncontrolled fury, he attacked her. The sheer number of stab wounds spoke to a frenzy, a release of something pent up and volatile. The confession sent shockwaves through Valley Springs. A 12-year-old boy barely old enough to ride a bike alone had committed one of the most brutal crimes the town had ever seen. The community struggled to reconcile the image of a quiet, unassuming kid with the horror of what he'd done. Layla's parents were inconsolable, their grief compounded by the betrayal of their own son. How could this happen? What had gone so wrong in their home, in their family, to lead to such a tragedy? The media, hungry for answers, speculated wildly. Was it video games? Bullying? A hidden mental illness? The truth, as it often is, was far more complex. As the case moved toward trial, psychologists evaluated the brother. They found signs of emotional disturbance, possibly exacerbated by family dynamics that were less than perfect. The Fowler household, while outwardly stable, had its tensions. The parents worked long hours and the children were often left to fend for themselves. The brother, at 12, was navigating the turbulent waters of adolescence, a time when, emotions run high and impulse control is shaky. Some experts suggested he might have undiagnosed behavioral issues, perhaps a precursor to conduct disorder. Others pointed to the lack of supervision that day, a fatal lapse that allowed a fleeting moment of anger to spiral into murder. But none of these explanations could fully account for the savagery of the act. It was as if a switch had flipped, turning a boy into a killer. The legal system faced a dilemma. At 12, the brother was too young to be tried as an adult, but the severity of the crime demanded accountability. Prosecutors charged him with second-degree murder in juvenile court, a decision that sparked debate. Some argued he was a child, incapable of fully grasping the consequences of his actions. Others saw a cold-blooded killer who had lied to cover his crime. The trial, held in 2015, was closed to the public due to the defendant's age, but details leaked out. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence, the knife, the lack of an intruder, the brother's shifting story. The defense leaned on his youth and emotional state, arguing that he was not a hardened criminal, but a boy who had made a terrible mistake. They pleaded for rehabilitation over punishment, citing studies that show juvenile brains are still developing, prone to impulsive decisions. The judge, tasked with balancing justice and mercy, sentenced the brother to a juvenile detention facility until the age of 23. It was the maximum penalty allowed under California's juvenile justice system. He would receive therapy, education, and counseling with the hope that he could one day reintegrate into society. But for Leila's family, the sentence felt like a hollow gesture. No amount of time could bring their daughter back. Her room, filled with her drawings and stuffed animals, remained untouched, a shrine to a life cut short. Her parents grappled with guilt, wondering if they could have seen the signs, if they could have prevented the tragedy. The community, too, was left reeling, their trust in the safety of their small town shattered. The murder of Leila Fowler raises questions that linger long after the case was closed. What drives a child to kill? Was the brother a monster or a product of circumstances no one fully understood? The absence of a clear motive makes the crime all the more unsettling. It wasn't about money or revenge or even a long simmering feud. It was a moment of rage, a fleeting impulse that ended in irreversible loss. Some point to the family's dynamics, others to the boy's psychological state, but the truth may lie in the gray space between. Children are not born killers, but under the right or wrong conditions, they can become capable of unthinkable. Leila's story is a reminder of the fragility of life, of how quickly a single moment can change everything. Her death left a scar on Valley Springs, a town that prided itself on its close-knit community. Neighbors began locking their doors and parents watched their children more closely. The case also sparked discussions about juvenile justice. Should a 12-year-old be judged as harshly as an adult? Can a child who commits such a crime ever be rehabilitated? These questions remain unanswered, as does the deeper mystery of what happened in the Fowler home that April afternoon. As we leave Valley Springs behind, the rain continues to fall, a soft requiem for Leila Fowler. Her life was brief, but her story endures. A cautionary tale of the darkness that can lurk within the most unexpected places. The brother, now a young man, serves out his sentence, his future uncertain. Will he find redemption, or will the weight of his actions define him forever? For Leila's family, there is no such thing as closure, only the endless ache of absence. And for us, the listeners, there is a challenge to look beyond the surface, to question the stories we're told, and to remember that even in the quietest towns, shadows can hide the most horrifying truth. Part 2, The Backpacker Murders, Australia 1989-1993. The Australian outback stretches endlessly under a merciless sun, a land of rugged beauty and unforgiving isolation. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, it became the hunting ground for one of the country's most notorious predators. A man whose name would become synonymous with evil. This is the story of the Backpacker Murders, a series of brutal killings that claimed the lives of 7 young travelers in the Belanglo State Forest. Their dreams of adventure turned into nightmares, and their killer, Ivan Milat, left a legacy of fear that still haunts the nation. As we venture into this chilling case, prepare to walk a path where trust was a fatal mistake, and the wilderness hid a monster in plain sight. It began in 1989, a time when Australia was a magnet for backpackers from around the world. Young, carefree, and eager for adventure, they hitchhiked along the highways, their backpacks slung over their shoulders, chasing freedom. The Hume Highway, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through New South Wales, was a popular route. It connected Sydney to Melbourne, passing through small towns and vast stretches of bushland. For most, it was a road to new experiences. For some, it was a road to nowhere. Among those who traveled it were Joanne Walters and Carolyn Clark, 2 British women in their early 20s, best friends. They had arrived in Australia to explore its wonders, unaware that their journey would end in horror. In April 1992, Joanne and Caroline vanished. They had been last seen in Sydney, planning to hitchhike south. Their disappearance raised little alarm at first. Backpackers often drifted off the grid, chasing whims or new friends. But weeks turned into months, and their families grew frantic. Across the globe in Britain, their parents pleaded for answers, but the trail was cold. It wasn't until September 1992 that the truth began to surface, and it came in the most gruesome way. Two runners, training in the Belanglo State Forest, stumbled across a shallow grave. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air, and as they brushed away leaves and dirt, they uncovered human remains. The police were called, and what they found would shock the nation. The bodies were those of Joanne Walters and Caroline Clark. Joanne had been stabbed 14 times, her wounds a frenzy of violence across her chest and neck. Caroline had been shot 10 times in the head, execution style, her body partially burned. The scene was a tableau of cruelty. Both women had been bound, tortured, and left to rot in the forest. The discovery sent ripples of fear through Australia. The Belanglo State Forest, once a quiet retreat for campers, was now a crime scene. Police launched a massive search, combing the area for clues. Days later, they found more. The remains of James Gibson and Deborah Everest, two Australian backpackers missing since 1989. Like Joanne and Caroline, they had been hitchhiking when they disappeared. Their bodies, too, bore the marks of savage violence, stab wounds, broken bones, and signs of prolonged suffering. The pattern was undeniable. Someone was targeting backpackers, luring them from the highway into the forest, where they met a brutal end. The media dubbed the case the Backpacker Murders, and panic spread. Hitchhiking, once a carefree rite of passage, became a gamble with death. Police appealed for information, urging anyone who had traveled the Hume Highway to come forward. Tips poured in, but the killer remained a ghost. Then, in November 1993, another gruesome find, the bodies of 3 German backpackers. Gabor Neugebauer, Anja Hapschied, and Simone Schmidl were uncovered in Belanglo. Gabor had been strangled and shot. Anja decapitated, her head never found. Simone had been stabbed repeatedly, her spine severed by a blade. The sheer depravity of the crime stunned investigators. This was no impulsive killer. This was a predator who reveled in control, in pain, in power. The nation was gripped by fear, but a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Paul Onions, a British backpacker, contacted police from England. In January 1990, he had narrowly escaped death on the Hume Highway. He'd been hitchhiking near Bowral when a friendly man in a pickup truck offered him a ride. The driver introduced himself as Bill and seemed harmless at first, chatting about the weather and Australia's sights. But as they drove deeper into the countryside, Bill's demeanor changed. He grew agitated, muttering to himself. When he pulled off the road into the Belanglo State Forest, claiming he needed to grab something from the back, Paul's instincts screamed danger. Bill returned with a rope and a gun, ordering Paul out of the truck. "This is a robbery," he snarled, but his eyes told a different story, one of intent far darker than theft. Paul bolted, zigzagging through the trees as bullets whizzed past him. He stumbled onto the highway, flagging down a passing car. The driver, a woman named Joanne Barry, saved his life, rushing him to a police station. Paul reported the attack, describing Bill as a man in his 40s with a mustache, driving a silver Nissan 4W. But the report was filed and forgotten until the bodies started turning up. When Paul saw news of the backpacker murders, he realized his attacker might be the killer. He flew back to Australia, working with police to recreate the incident. His testimony was a lifeline, narrowing the suspect pool. Police began to focus on men with criminal histories, particularly those familiar with Belanglo's remote trails. One name kept surfacing: Ivan Milat. A 49-year-old road worker from Eaglevale, a suburb of Sydney, Milat was no stranger to trouble. Born into a large Croatian-Australian family, he grew up in a rough household where discipline was harsh and morality flexible. By his 20s, he had a rap sheet: burglary, assault, even a suspected rape, though charges were dropped. Milat was charming when he wanted to be, with a disarming smile and a knack for blending in. He worked odd jobs, often on rural roads, and was an avid hunter, skilled with firearms and knives. He knew the Belanglo forest like the back of his hand, using it as a playground for his twisted hobbies. To his neighbors, he was just another working-class bloke. To his victims, he was a nightmare made flesh. Police dug into Milat's life, uncovering a chilling obsession with weapons. He owned an arsenal of guns, knives, and ropes stashed in his home in a nearby shed. His brothers, some with their own criminal ties, described him as volatile, a man who thrived on dominance. Investigators learned Milat often drove the Hume Highway, offering rides to strangers, His silver Nissan 4WD matched Paul Onion's description, and his physical appearance, mustached, weathered, with a predator's gaze, fit the profile. But suspicion wasn't enough. They needed evidence to tie him to the murders. In May 1994, police executed a series of raids on Milat's properties. What they found was a house of horrors. Inside Milat's Eaglevale home, officers discovered a trove of incriminating items. Sleeping bags, clothing, and camping gear belonging to the victims were scattered among his possessions. A camera lens engraved with Simone Schmidl's name sat on a shelf. A .22 rifle, matched to the bullets in Caroline Clark's skull, was hidden in a wall cavity. Ropes, stained with blood, were coiled in a closet. Most damning was a photo of Milat's girlfriend wearing a jacket stolen from Anya Hapshiadeh. The evidence was overwhelming, a breadcrumb trail leading straight to the forest graves. Milat was arrested, his charm replaced by a cold defiance. "You've got the wrong bloke," he sneered, but the weight of the evidence was crushing. The trial began in 1996, and Australia watched in morbid fascination. Milat faced 7 counts of murder, plus charges for the attempted murder of Paul Onions. The prosecution painted a portrait of a sadistic killer who preyed on vulnerability. They described how he lured his victims with offers of rides, only to turn on them in the isolation of Belanglo. The murders were methodical bindings, precise stab wounds, and in some cases prolonged torture. Milat's defense was flimsy, claiming the items in his home were borrowed or found. He suggested his brothers, some with shady past, might be involved, but no evidence supported this. Paul Onion's testimony was the nail in the coffin. He identified Milat in court, his voice steady despite the trauma. "That's him," he said. "That's the man who tried to kill me." The jury deliberated for days, wrestling with the horror of the crimes. On July 27, 1996, they delivered their verdict: guilty on all counts. Milat was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus 18 years for the attack on Onions. The courtroom was silent as the judge condemned him, calling his acts heinous beyond comprehension. Milat showed no remorse, his face a mask of indifference. He maintained his innocence even as he was led away to Goulburn Supermax, Australia's toughest prison. For the victims' families, the verdict brought relief, but no closure. Their children were gone, their dreams of adventure extinguished by a man who saw them as prey. Backpacker murders left a permanent scar on Australia. Hitchhiking, once a symbol of freedom, became a cautionary tale. The Belanglo State Forest, now synonymous with death, was avoided by campers for years. The case prompted changes in how missing persons cases were handled, with police establishing a task force to track transient travelers. It also exposed the dangers of rural isolation, where a predator could operate undetected for years. Milat's motives remain a mystery. Was it power, sexual gratification, or simply the thrill of the hunt? Psychologists labeled him a psychopath, driven by a need to dominate. His refusal to confess, even on his deathbed, only deepened the enigma. Milat died in prison in October 2019 at 74 from cancer. He took his secrets to the grave, never admitting to the murders or revealing if there were other victims. Some suspect he killed more. Dozens of backpackers vanished in the region during his active years, their cases unsolved. His death brought no solace to the families, who still mourn their loved ones. Joanne Walter's mother spoke at a memorial, her voice breaking. "She was my light. No sentence, no death can bring her back." The forest, now reclaimed by nature, holds its own silence. The graves long since emptied, but never forgotten. The backpacker murders remind us how easily evil can hide behind a friendly face. Ivan Milat was not a monster in the shadows. He was a man you'd pass on the street, a man who offered a ride with a smile. His victims trusted him, and that trust cost them everything. As the rain falls outside, imagine the last moments of those young travelers, their hopes fading in the dark of Belanglo. What did they feel as the man they thought was a savior revealed his true fate? The answer lies buried in the forest, a truth too heavy to unearth. Milat's legacy is a warning. The road may seem open, but danger often rides alongside. Part 3. The Shakti Mills Gang Rape, Mumbai, India, 2013. In the heart of Mumbai, India, a city that never sleeps, where dreams clashed with harsh realities, a crime unfolded in 2013 that would shake the nation to its core. The Shakti Mills, an abandoned textile factory shrouded in decay, became the stage for an act of unimaginable cruelty. This is the story of a young photojournalist, a 22-year-old woman whose courage in the face of horror sparked a movement. Her assault at the hands of 5 men was not just a violation of her body, but a wound to the soul of a country grappling with its treatment of women. As we step into this harrowing case, brace yourself for a tale of brutality, resilience, and a fight for justice that echoed far beyond the rusted gates of Shakti Mills. It was August 22, 2013, a humid evening in Mumbai's Lower Parel district. The city buzzed with its usual chaos, honking rickshaws, crowded streets, and the hum of ambition. The Shakti Mills compound, once a thriving hub of industry, now stood as a relic, its crumbling walls overtaken by weeds and shadows. It was here that a young woman, whom we'll call Priya to protect her identity, arrived with a male colleague. A photojournalist intern at a local magazine, Priya was eager to prove herself. Her assignment was simple: capture images of the derelict mills for a feature on Mumbai's forgotten spaces. Armed with her camera and a passion for storytelling, she saw beauty in the decay, unaware that danger lurked in the silence. Priya and her colleague, a 21-year-old aspiring journalist, entered the compound around 6:00 p.m. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the broken machinery and shattered glass. The place felt eerie, but not threatening, at least not at first. They moved deeper into the complex, snapping photos, discussing angles, lost in their work. But as they ventured further, a group of men emerged from the ruins. 5 figures, their faces hardened by lives of desperation, watched the pair with predatory intent. These were not strangers to the mills. They were local drifters, men in their late teens to early 20s, known for petty crimes and loitering in the abandoned site. To them, Priya and her colleague were intruders in their domain and easy targets. The men approached, their voices casual but edged with menace. "What are you doing here?" one demanded, his eyes lingering on Priya. She sensed the shift in the air, the way their gazes stripped away her confidence. Her colleague tried to defuse the situation, explaining they were just taking photos, but the men weren't listening. They closed in, circling like wolves. Priya's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady, suggesting they leave. Before they could retreat, the men attacked. They grabbed her colleague, beating him with fists and a metal rod, tying him to a pole with a belt. Priya tried to run, but hands seized her, dragging her into the darkness of the mill. What followed was a nightmare of violence. The 5 men, later identified as Vijay Jadhav, Mohammed Qasim Sheikh, Mohammed Salim Ansari, Siraj Khan, and a juvenile whose name was withheld, took turns raping Priya. They assaulted her for over an hour, their laughter mingling with her cries. To ensure her silence, they photographed the attack with a mobile phone, threatening to release the images if she spoke. Priya's colleague, bound and helpless, could only listen to her screams, his own injuries rendering him powerless. The men reveled in their control, their actions fueled by a toxic mix of entitlement and rage. When they finally released Priya, they warned her to stay quiet, melting back into the shadows of the mill. Bruised, bleeding, and in shock, Priya stumbled out of the compound, her colleague at her side. They made their way to Jaslock Hospital, where Priya's injuries confirmed the brutality of the assault. Doctors alerted the police, and within hours, the Shakti Mills case became a national scandal. Priya's courage in reporting the crime, despite the threats, was extraordinary. She provided a detailed account describing her attackers' faces, their clothes, even the layout of the mill. Her colleague corroborated her story, his own trauma evident in his trembling voice. The police launched a manhunt, vowing to bring the perpetrators to justice. Mumbai, a city hardened by crime, was stunned. This wasn't a random act, it was a deliberate attack on a woman daring to exist in a public space. The investigation moved swiftly. Using Priya's descriptions and sketches, police zeroed in on the suspects. The Shakti Mills compound was a known haunt for vagrants, and local informants pointed to a group of young men who frequented the area. Within 48 hours, Vijay Jadhav, 19, was arrested. Under interrogation, he crumbled, naming his accomplices. By August 25, all 5 suspects were in custody. Their backgrounds painted a grim picture. Most were school dropouts from impoverished families, scraping by through theft and odd jobs. The juvenile, only 16, was the youngest, but his role in the assault was no less horrific. Their interrogations revealed a chilling lack of remorse. They saw Priya as an opportunity, a woman who had wandered into their territory. The evidence was damning. Police recovered the mobile phone used to photograph the assault, its images a haunting record of the crime. Bloodstains and torn clothing found at the mill matched Priya's account. DNA evidence linked the suspects to the scene, and their conflicting alibis unraveled under scrutiny. The juvenile, tried separately due to his age, admitted his involvement, claiming he was just following the others, but Priya's testimony, delivered with unwavering clarity, left no room for doubt. She faced her attackers in court, her voice steady despite the weight of their stares. "They thought they could break me," she later told a journalist, "but I won't let them win." The trial, which began in 2014, was a media frenzy. India was already reeling from the 2012 Delhi gang rape, a case that had ignited nationwide protests and forced a reckoning on gender violence. The Shakti Mills case became a rallying cry, a symbol of the dangers women faced in a society where misogyny often went unchecked. Crowds gathered outside the Mumbai courthouse, holding signs that read "Justice for our sisters" and "End rape culture." Priya, shielded from the public eye, became an icon of resilience. Her decision to speak out, to refuse shame, inspired countless others. Women across India shared their own stories of assault, breaking the silence that had long protected predators. Prosecutors charged the 4 adult suspects with gang rape, kidnapping, criminal intimidation, and destruction of evidence. The juvenile faced a separate trial under India's Juvenile Justice Act. The defense argued that the men were products of their environment, poverty, lack of education, and a culture that normalized violence against women. They claimed the assault was a momentary lapse, not premeditated. But the prosecution dismantled this narrative, pointing to the calculated nature of the attack, the binding of Priya's colleague, the use of a phone to blackmail her, the prolonged duration of the assault. These were not impulsive acts, but a display of power, a message that women were not safe, even in the heart of a bustling city. The courtroom was a battleground of emotions. Priya's testimony, delivered behind a screen to protect her identity, was wrenching. She recounted every detail, the men's taunts, the pain, the fear that she might not survive. Her colleague, still haunted by his inability to protect her, broke down on the stand. The suspects, by contrast, showed little emotion. Vijay Jadhav smirked during parts of the trial, while Mohammed Qasim Sheikh stared blankly ahead. Their lack of remorse fueled public outrage, amplifying calls for harsher penalties. India's legal system, often criticized for leniency in rape cases, faced immense pressure to deliver justice. On April 4th, 2014, the verdict came down. The 4 adult suspects, Vijay Jadhav, Mohammed Qasim Sheikh, Mohammed Salim Ansari, and Siraj Khan, were found guilty on all counts. The judge, his voice heavy with condemnation, sentenced them to life imprisonment without parole, a rare punishment under India's then recently amended rape laws. The decision was historic. The Shakti Mills case was among the first to invoke the 2013 Criminal Law Amendment, passed in response to the Delhi case, which allowed for life sentences in cases of extreme brutality. The juvenile, tried separately, received the maximum penalty under juvenile law, 3 years in a reform facility. For many, his sentence felt too light, a reminder of the gaps in India's justice system. The verdict was a victory, but it was bittersweet. Priya's life had been irrevocably changed. She left journalism, unable to face the memories her camera once captured. She moved away from Mumbai, seeking peace in anonymity. Her colleague, too, struggled with guilt and trauma, haunted by the what-ifs. Yet Priya's courage had a ripple effect. The case galvanized India's women's rights movement, leading to increased police patrols in abandoned areas, stricter laws on sexual violence, and public awareness campaigns. Mumbai's government vowed to reclaim derelict sites like Shakti Mills, though many remain untouched, silent witnesses to the city's darker side. The Shakti Mills case exposed the underbelly of a nation in transition. India, with its booming economy and global ambitions, was forced to confront its failures. Its indifference to women's safety, its neglect of the marginalized, its reluctance to challenge patriarchal norms. The 5 men were not just criminals. They were products of a society that had failed to teach them respect, to offer them opportunities, to hold them accountable. Their poverty was no excuse, but it was a factor, a reminder that crime often festers in the cracks of inequality. Priya's attackers saw her as a symbol of a world they could never enter. A young, educated woman with a future? In their twisted logic, her destruction was their revenge. For Priya, survival was only the beginning. She faced not just physical scars, but the weight of societal judgment. In India, rape survivors are often stigmatized, their lives scrutinized, their silence demanded. Priya refused to bow to this pressure. She worked with counselors, rebuilt her life, and quietly supported other survivors. Her story, though anonymous, became a beacon of hope. "I am not a victim," she told a support group years later. "I am a fighter. They took that night, but they won't take my tomorrow." Her words carried the weight of a woman who had stared into the abyss and walked away stronger. The Shakti Mills compound still stands, a ghost of its former self. The rusted machinery, the broken windows, the overgrown weeds. They hold the echoes of that August evening. The men who attacked Priya will spend their lives behind bars, their youth wasted in cells. The juvenile released in 2016 disappeared into obscurity, his fate unknown, but the case's impact endures. It forced India to look in the mirror, to question how it protects its daughters, how it heals its wounded. Protests sparked by the case led to new laws, new conversations, new promises. Yet, for every step forward, there are reminders of how far there is to go. Sexual violence remains a scourge, and the fight for safety is far from won. As the rain falls softly outside, imagine Priya standing at the gates of Shakti Mills, her camera in hand, unaware of the horror awaiting her. Picture her strength as she faced her attackers in court, her voice cutting through their defiance. The darkness of that night could have defined her, but she chose to define herself. The Shakti Mills case is not just a story of crime, it's a testament to survival, to the power of one woman's refusal to be silent. Mumbai moves on, its streets alive with noise and ambition, but the shadows of the mills linger, whispering a truth we cannot ignore. Justice may prevail, but the scars of injustice never fully fade. Part 4, The Road Rage Murder, by Jason Ivler, Philippines 2013. In the chaotic streets of Quezon City, Philippines, where traffic jams and tempers flare under the tropical sun, a single moment of rage turned a bustling intersection into a killing ground. The year was 2012, but the consequences would reverberate into 2013, leaving a family shattered and a nation questioning the cost of unchecked anger. This is the story of Jason Ivler, a man whose privileged life masked volatile darkness, and Ronaldo de Guzman, an innocent father whose life was stolen in a senseless act of violence. What began as a fleeting dispute on the road ended in murder, exposing the thin line between frustration and fatality. As we delve into this chilling case, prepare to navigate a tale of entitlement, fury, and a justice system pushed to its limits. It was November 18th, 2012, a humid evening in Quezon City, one of the Philippines' most crowded urban hubs. The streets were alive with the usual cacophony, honking horns, revving engines, and the chatter of commuters. Ronaldo de Guzman, a 47-year-old businessman, was driving home with his wife and teenage daughter. A family man known for his calm demeanor, Ronaldo was the kind of person who avoided conflict, always quick to smile and slow to anger. His Toyota sedan weaved through the traffic, just another car in the endless stream. But ahead of him, a black BMW driven by Jason Ivler was moving erratically, cutting lanes and ignoring signals. To Ronaldo, it was just another reckless driver. He had no idea he was about to cross paths with a man who thrived on confrontation. Jason Ivler was 28, a Filipino-American with a life that seemed charmed on the surface. Born to a wealthy family, he grew up with privilege, private schools, flashy cars, and connections that opened doors. But beneath the polished exterior was a troubled soul. Ivler had a history of run-ins with the law, drug charges, bar fights, and allegations of domestic violence. His temper was legendary, a fuse so short it could ignite over the smallest slight. He had spent time in the U.S. dabbling in music and modeling, but his return to the Philippines brought old habits back. On that November evening, Eveler was behind the wheel, his mood already sour, perhaps fueled by alcohol or the cocaine that friends said he used regularly. When Ronaldo's car got too close to his BMW, Eveler saw it as a challenge. The incident began at a busy intersection near Edessa, a major artery in Quezon City. Ronaldo, trying to merge into traffic, inadvertently cut off Eveler's BMW. It was a minor maneuver, the kind that happens countless times in a city where driving is a contact sport. Ronaldo likely didn't think twice about it, but Eveler did. His face twisted with rage as he leaned on his horn, the sound piercing the evening air. Ronaldo, sensing the aggression, raised a hand in apology, hoping to defuse the situation, but Eveler wasn't interested in apologies. He gunned his engine, pulling alongside Ronaldo's car, his window down, shouting profanities. Ronaldo's wife, sitting in the passenger seat, urged him to ignore the man. But Eveler's tirade only grew louder. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but felt like an eternity to those who witnessed it. Eveler, consumed by fury, reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a 9mm pistol. The gun, illegally obtained, was a constant companion, a symbol of the power he craved. He leaned out his window, aimed at Ronaldo's car, and fired. The first shot shattered the driver's side window, striking Ronaldo in the chest. His wife screamed as the car swerved, Ronaldo's hand slipping from the wheel. A second shot hit his shoulder, and a third grazed his neck. The Toyota lurched forward, crashing into a nearby barrier. Eveler, his rage spent, sped off into the night, leaving chaos in his wake. Ronaldo's daughter, in the back seat, sobbed hysterically, her father's blood pooling around her. Bystanders rushed to the scene, their phones already dialing emergency services. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Ronaldo's injuries were catastrophic. The bullets had torn through vital organs, and despite their efforts, he was pronounced dead at the hospital. His wife and daughter, physically unharmed but emotionally shattered, clung to each other, unable to process the horror. The police cordoned off the intersection, collecting shell casings and interviewing witnesses. Several drivers had seen the black BMW and its furious driver, and one had caught a partial license plate. The description of the shooter, young, light-skinned with a buzz cut, matched Eveler, a man already known to local authorities for his volatile behavior. The hunt for Jason Eveler was on. Quezon City erupted in outrage. Road rage was a fact of life in the Philippines, but this was different. A cold-blooded murder in front of a man's family. The media latched onto the story, plastering Ronaldo's smiling face across newspapers and television screens. He was portrayed as the everyman, a hard-working father whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Eveler, by contrast, was vilified as a spoiled rich kid, a ticking time bomb who had finally exploded. The public demanded justice, and the police faced immense pressure to catch him, but Eveler had vanished. He abandoned his BMW in a nearby alley, wiped clean of prints, and went underground, relying on his family's wealth and connections to evade capture. For months, Eveler was a ghost. The police followed leads, raiding properties linked to his family, but he always seemed one step ahead. Tips came in, sightings in Manila, rumors of him fleeing to the provinces, but none panned out. Ronaldo's family, meanwhile, grappled with their loss. His wife Maria struggled to hold the family together, haunted by the image of her husband's lifeless body. Their daughter, only 16, withdrew into herself, plagued by nightmares and guilt for surviving when her father didn't. The de Guzmans became vocal advocates for stricter gun laws and road safety, their grief fueling a public campaign. "He was our rock," Maria told reporters, her voice breaking. "This man took him from us for nothing." The breakthrough came in January 2013, nearly 3 months after the shooting. Acting on a tip, police surrounded a safe house in Quezon City, where Eveler was hiding. The raid was tense. Eveler was armed and had a history of violence. When officers breached the door, he opened fire, wounding 2 policemen. A chaotic shootout ensued as he was dragged from the house, bloodied and defiant. He spat curses at the officers. The arrest was a triumph, but it came at a cost. The wounded policeman survived, but the incident underscored Eveler's recklessness, his refusal to go quietly. In custody, Eveler's arrogance faded, replaced by a calculated silence. He refused to confess, claiming he was a victim of mistaken identity, but the evidence was overwhelming. Ballistics matched the bullets from Ronaldo's body to Ivler's 9MA pistol recovered during the raid. Witnesses identified him in a lineup, their accounts consistent: the BMW, the shouting, the gun. CCTV footage from a nearby gas station showed Ivler's car fleeing the scene, his face briefly visible. Even his own family, though initially protective, began to distance themselves, unwilling to shield a murderer. Ivler's mother, a prominent socialite, issued a statement expressing sorrow for the de Guzmans, but stopped short of admitting her son's guilt. The trial, which began in late 2013, was a media circus. Quezon City's courthouse was packed with reporters, activists, and curious onlookers. Ivler, dressed in a crisp suit, tried to project innocence, but his history told a different story. Prosecutors painted him as a man ruled by entitlement, someone who saw himself above consequences. They presented his rap sheet: arrest for assault, drug possession, and a dismissed domestic violence case from years earlier. Witnesses testified to his explosive temper, recounting bar fights and threats made over trivial disputes. One former girlfriend described him as charming until he wasn't, recalling how he'd once thrown a glass at a wall when she disagreed with him. The defense leaned on Ivler's upbringing, arguing that his privileged but unstable childhood had left him emotionally stunted. They claimed the shooting was a heat-of-the-moment act, not premeditated murder. Ivler, they said, was under the influence of drugs and alcohol, his judgment impaired. A psychologist testified that he suffered from intermittent explosive disorder, a condition marked by sudden bursts of rage. But the prosecution dismantled this narrative. The fact that Ivler fired multiple shots, fled the scene, and evaded capture for months showed calculation, not impulsivity. This was not a man out of control, the prosecutor argued. This was a man who chose to kill and then chose to run. Ronaldo's family sat in the front row, their faces etched with pain. Maria testified, her voice steady but laced with grief. She described the night of the shooting, the sound of gunfire, the moment she realized her husband was gone. He was a good man, she said, tears streaming down her face. He didn't deserve to die like that in front of our daughter. The courtroom was silent as she spoke, the weight of her loss palpable. Ivler, for his part, showed little emotion, staring at the floor during her testimony. His lack of remorse became a focal point for the prosecution, who argued that his arrogance was as much a weapon as his gun. The trial wasn't just about Ivler. It became a referendum on privilege and accountability in the Philippines. The country's elite often escape justice, their wealth buying silence or leniency. Ivler's case tested whether the system could hold one of its own accountable. Public outrage filled the proceedings, with protests outside the courthouse demanding a harsh sentence. Ronaldo's death had struck a chord, a reminder of the everyday dangers on Philippine roads and the impunity of those who felt untouchable. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Justice for Ronaldo, amplifying the call for change. In early 2014, the verdict was delivered. Ivler was found guilty of murder, the judge citing the deliberate and malicious nature of the crime. The courtroom erupted in applause as he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, a rare punishment in a system known for lighter penalties. Ivler's face remained impassive, but his mother wept in the gallery, her dreams for her son shattered. For the de Guzmans, the verdict was a hollow victory. No sentence can bring him back, Maria said outside the courthouse, but at least he can't hurt anyone else. The judge also ordered Ivler to pay the family millions of pesos in damages, though they knew they'd likely never see the money. The aftermath of the case rippled through the Philippines. Ronaldo's death sparked a national conversation about road rage, a problem so pervasive that the government introduced new laws. The Land Transportation Office launched campaigns promoting road courtesy, and police cracked down on illegal firearms, a scourge in a country with lax gun laws. Ivler's conviction was seen as a step toward accountability, proof that wealth could always buy freedom. But for many, it wasn't enough. The Guzmans became advocates, speaking at schools and community centers about the dangers of anger and the need for conflict resolution. Maria founded a foundation in Ronaldo's name, offering support to victims of violent crime. Ivler, now in his 40s, remains in New Bilibid prison, a sprawling facility notorious for its harsh conditions. Reports from inmates paint him as a loner, his once cocky demeanor dulled by years behind bars. He's appealed his conviction multiple times, each attempt denied. Some say he's found religion. Others that he's still the same volatile man, waiting for a chance to lash out. For the de Guzmans, Ivler's fate is irrelevant. They've rebuilt their lives as best they can, though the pain of Ronaldo's absence never fades. Maria keeps a photo of him on her nightstand, a reminder of the man who loved her fiercely and died for no reason at all. The road rage murder of Ronaldo de Guzman is a stark reminder of how quickly anger can turn deadly. Jason Ivler was not a serial killer or a mastermind. He was an ordinary man with an extraordinary capacity for rage. His story asks us to look at the moments we lose control, the times we let frustration guide our hands. In Quezon City, the intersection where Ronaldo died is just another stretch of road now. The blood long washed away. But for those who remember, it's a monument to a life stolen and a warning to keep our demons in check. As the rain falls outside, imagine Ronaldo's final moments. His family's screams, the sound of a gun shattering the night. What drove Ivler to pull that trigger? The answer lies not just in him, but in all of us. Waiting at the edge of our patience. Part 5, the murder of Madame Juliette Dupont, Paris, France, 2013. In the romantic glow of Paris, where cobblestone streets and ancient architecture whisper tales of love and art, a darker story unfolded in 2013. Beneath the city's elegance, a crime of chilling precision shattered the illusion of safety. This is the story of Madame Juliette Dupont, an 80-year-old widow whose life was extinguished in a quiet alley in Hugo Lemoyne, a troubled philosopher whose descent into madness turned him into a killer. What drove a man of intellect to commit such a brutal act? Was it ideology, despair, or something far more sinister? As we step into this haunting case, prepare to explore a mind unraveling, a city betrayed, and a murder that forced Paris to confront the shadows lurking in its heart. It was October 12th, 2013, a crisp autumn evening in Paris's 7th arrondissement, a neighborhood of stately apartments and tree-lined boulevards. Madame Juliette Dupont, a retired schoolteacher, was a familiar figure in the area. At 80, she carried herself with grace, her silver hair neatly pinned, her eyes bright with the wisdom of a life well lived. A widow for over a decade, Juliette lived alone in a modest but elegant apartment, surrounded by books and photographs of her late husband and grown children. She was known for her kindness, slipping candies to neighborhood kids, chatting with shopkeepers, and volunteering at a local literacy program. That evening, she left her home for a short walk to the corner market, a routine she'd followed for years. She had no reason to suspect the danger waiting in the twilight. Juliette's destination was just 2 blocks away, a small grocery where she often bought bread and flowers. The route took her through a narrow alley, a shortcut she'd used countless times. It was a quiet path, flanked by high walls and the soft glow of street lamps. At around 7:30 p.m., neighbors reported hearing a faint cry, quickly silenced. No one thought much of it. Paris was a city of sounds, and the alley was often empty. But when Juliette didn't return home, her daughter Claire grew worried. She called her mother's phone, but it went unanswered. By 9:00 p.m., Claire contacted the police, her voice trembling with dread. Officers began a search, their flashlights cutting through the evening mist. What they found in that alley would haunt them forever. Juliette Dupont lay crumpled on the cobblestones, her scarf tangled around her neck, her eyes staring blankly at the sky. She had been stabbed 7 times. Precise, deliberate wounds to her chest and abdomen. Blood soaked her coat pooling beneath her, the vibrant red stark against the gray stones. Her purse was untouched, ruling out robbery. The ferocity of the attack suggested rage, yet the scene was eerily orderly. No signs of a struggle, no scattered belongings. A single rose, one she'd likely bought at the market, lay beside her, its petals crushed. The police cordoned off the alley, their faces grim as they surveyed the body of a woman who'd been a pillar of her community. Paris, a city accustomed to beauty, was confronted with brutality. The murder of Madame Dupont sent shockwaves through the 7th arrondissement. Residents locked their doors and the media descended, their headlines screaming of an elderly woman slaughtered in the City of Light. Juliette's family was devastated. Claire, her eldest daughter, spoke at a press conference, tears streaming down her face. "She was our heart," she said. Who could do this to someone so gentle? The police, under pressure to solve the case, launched a meticulous investigation. They canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed witnesses, and collected forensic evidence. A few neighbors recalled seeing a man loitering near the alley that evening, a tall, thin figure in a dark coat, his face partially obscured by a scarf. Surveillance cameras from a nearby cafe provided grainy footage of a similar man walking with purpose, his head bowed. It was a start, but not enough. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a local bookstore owner. She contacted police, reporting a strange encounter with a regular customer, Hugo Lemoine, a 32-year-old philosophy graduate. Hugo was known for his intense demeanor, often lingering in the shop to discuss Nietzsche, Sartre, and the futility of modern life. In the days before the murder, he'd grown agitated, ranting about society's parasites and the need for cleansing. The bookseller, unnerved by his tone, noted that he'd purchased a book on urban guerrilla tactics just a week earlier. She also mentioned his appearance, tall, gaunt, with a dark coat matching the description from the alley. The police zeroed in on Hugo, their suspicions deepening when they learned he lived just 3 blocks from the crime scene. Hugo Lemoine was an enigma, a brilliant but troubled mind. He'd earned a master's degree in philosophy from the Sorbonne, where professors praised his intellect but noted his growing detachment. He had once dreamed of teaching, but rejections from academic posts left him bitter. By 2013, he was unemployed, surviving on odd jobs and a small inheritance. Hugo's life was a paradox. He wrote eloquent essays on human connection, yet lived in near-total isolation. His apartment, a cluttered studio filled with books and scribbled manifestos, reflected his unraveling psyche. Friends described him as a man teetering on the edge, obsessed with societal decay, prone to depressive spirals, and increasingly paranoid. He saw himself as an outsider, a philosopher misunderstood by a world he despised. Police searched Hugo's apartment, uncovering a chilling trove of evidence. A blood-stained knife hidden beneath a floorboard matched the wounds on Juliet's body. A journal detailed his fixation on symbols of privilege, with references to elderly women as gatekeepers of a rotting system. One entry, dated the day before the murder, read, "The old must fall for the new to rise. Blood is the price of truth." Clothing matching the suspect's description was found in his closet, traces of Juliet's blood on the coat sleeve. Surveillance footage confirmed his presence near the alley at the time of the attack. When confronted, Hugo didn't resist arrest. He sat calmly in the interrogation room, his eyes distant, as if detached from the reality of his actions. "I did what was necessary," he said softly, his voice devoid of emotion. The investigation revealed a motive as disturbing as the crime itself. Hugo had targeted Juliet, not for who she was, but for what she represented. To him, she was a symbol of the bourgeoisie, an elderly, comfortable woman living in a city he saw as corrupt and elitist. His journals painted a picture of a man consumed by nihilism, convinced that random acts of violence could spark a societal awakening. Psychologists who evaluated him diagnosed untreated depression and possible schizophrenia. Noting his obsession with apocalyptic philosophies, Hugo had spent weeks planning the murder, choosing the alley for its seclusion and Juliet for her vulnerability. The rose beside her body wasn't an accident. He'd placed it there, a twisted gesture he later described as a farewell to the old world. The trial, held in 2014, was a media spectacle. Paris, a city that prided itself on culture and civility, was forced to confront the darkness within one of its own. Hugo faced charges of first-degree murder, with prosecutors arguing that his actions were premeditated and ideologically driven. They presented his journal, the knife, and the surveillance footage, painting him as a calculating killer who used philosophy to justify his madness. "This was not a crime of passion," the prosecutor declared. "It was a crime of conviction, a deliberate choice to take a life." The courtroom was packed, with Juliet's family in the front row, their grief palpable. Claire, testifying, described her mother's warmth, her love for teaching, her habit of humming old French songs. "He didn't just kill her," she said, glaring at Hugo. "He killed a piece of all of us." Hugo's defense leaned heavily on his mental state. They called psychiatrists who testified to his untreated disorders, arguing that he was not fully responsible for his actions. "Hugo Lemoine was a man lost in his own mind," his lawyer said. "His illness warped his perception, turning his thoughts into a battlefield." They pointed to his lack of prior violence, his academic achievements, and his isolation as evidence of a man who could be rehabilitated. But the prosecution countered with Hugo's own words read aloud from his journal. "I chose her because she was weak. Her death will echo." These were not the ramblings of a confused mind, they argued, but the manifesto of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Hugo took the stand, a rare move that captivated the courtroom. His voice was calm, almost academic, as he explained his actions. "Society is a lie," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "We cling to comfort while the world burns. I acted to expose that lie." When asked about Juliet, he paused, then said, "She was collateral. Her death served a purpose." The statement drew gasps from the gallery. Juliet's son, Pierre, stormed out, unable to bear the... Hugo's lack of remorse became a focal point, undermining the defense's claim of mental instability. He spoke with clarity, not confusion, his words a chilling blend of arrogance and detachment. The trial also sparked a broader reckoning. Paris, often idealized as a haven of romance, was forced to confront its blind spots. Mental health services, chronically underfunded, had failed Hugo, who'd sought help sporadically but never received consistent care. The case highlighted the stigma around mental illness in France, where many suffered in silence. It also raised questions about urban safety. How could an elderly woman be murdered in a wealthy neighborhood steps from her home? Activists called for better street lighting and community patrols, while others demanded reforms to address the root causes of violence: poverty, isolation, and untreated psychological disorders. In June 2014, the verdict was delivered. Hugo Lemoine was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The judge, in his ruling, called the crime a betrayal of humanity, condemning Hugo's attempt to cloak his actions in philosophy. "Your ideas do not justify murder," he said. "You chose to kill an innocent woman, and you will pay the price." The courtroom was silent as Hugo was led away, his expression for Juliet's family. The sentence offered little comfort. "He took her from us," Claire said outside the courthouse. "No prison can undo that." The aftermath of Juliet's murder left Paris changed. Her apartment, once a haven of warmth, was sold, her belongings packed away. Her children created a scholarship in her name, supporting literacy programs she loved. The alley where she died became a site of quiet pilgrimage, with neighbors leaving flowers and candles. Hugo, now in his 40s, remains in Clairvaux prison, a high-security facility. Reports from guards describe him as withdrawn, spending his days writing essays no one reads. Some believe he's softened, haunted by his actions. Others say he's as cold as ever, a man who sees himself as a martyr. The murder of Madame Juliette Dupont is a tragedy of contrasts, a city of light dimmed by darkness, a woman of compassion killed by a man of contempt. It forces us to ask, what happens when intellect becomes a weapon, when despair festers unchecked? Hugo Lemoine was not a monster in the traditional sense. He was a man who let his mind become one. His crime reminds us that evil doesn't always lurk in shadows. It can walk among us, cloaked in eloquence and conviction. As the rain falls outside, picture Juliet's final walk, the rose in her hand, the alley closing in. Her life ended, but her story endures. A warning that even in the most beautiful places, the human heart can harbor unimaginable horror. Part 6, The Murder of Emma, by Martin Norgaard. Odense, Denmark, 2013. In the quaint cobblestone streets of Odense, Denmark, a city steeped in fairy tale charm and Nordic serenity, a darkness festered in 2013 that would unravel the illusion of safety. This is the story of Emma, a vibrant young woman whose life was stolen by the man she once loved, Martin Norgaard. A former soldier haunted by the ghosts of war, Martin's untreated trauma turned him into a ticking time bomb, and Emma paid the ultimate price. What began as a story of love ended in a brutal act of betrayal, exposing the hidden scars of military service and the devastating cost of ignored cries for help. As we step into this chilling case, prepare to confront a tale of obsession, rage, and a town forever changed by the echoes of a single violent night. It was November 2nd, 2013, a cold, foggy evening in Odense, A city known for its Hans Christian Andersen legacy and tight-knit community, Emma, a 29-year-old social worker, was the embodiment of warmth. Her laughter-filled rooms, her compassion touched lives. She worked with at-risk youth, her optimism a beacon for those she helped. Emma's life was full, a close circle of friends, a cozy apartment filled with plants, and dreams of starting a family someday. But her heart carried a burden. Her ex-boyfriend, Martin Norgard. Their relationship, once passionate, had crumbled under the weight of his demons, and though Emma had moved on, Martin could not let go. Martin Norgard, 32, was a man shaped by war. A former Danish soldier, he'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, witnessing horrors that left deep scars. The military had trained him to fight, but it hadn't prepared him for the battles within. Diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, upon his return, Martin refused therapy, dismissing it as weakness. Nightmares plagued him, his temper flared unpredictably, and alcohol became his crutch. Emma, who met him in 2011, saw the good in him. A man capable of tenderness, haunted by memories he couldn't share. She tried to help, encouraging him to seek treatment, but Martin's pride and paranoia pushed her away. By mid-2013, Emma ended the relationship, choosing her own well-being over his chaos. It was a decision that would cost her everything. That November evening, Emma was at home, winding down after a long day. Her apartment, on the second floor of a quiet building, was a sanctuary. Soft lights, a kettle on the stove, a book open on the couch. She had no reason to fear, no inkling that Martin was spiraling. He'd been texting her for weeks, alternating between apologies and accusations, but Emma, advised by friends, had blocked his number. Unknown to her, Martin was unraveling. Fueled by whiskey and resentment, he fixated on Emma's rejection as a betrayal. In his fractured mind, she became the source of his pain, a symbol of a world that had moved on without him. Armed with a knife from his kitchen, he made his way to her apartment, his intent as clear as it was deadly. At around 9:00 p.m., neighbors heard a commotion, a muffled scream, the sound of glass breaking. They hesitated, unsure if it was a domestic spat or something worse. No one called the police, a decision they'd later regret. Inside Emma's apartment, a nightmare unfolded. Martin had forced his way in, shattering a window to bypass the locked door. Emma, caught off guard, tried to reason with him, her voice calm despite her fear. But Martin was beyond reason. His eyes, wild with rage, saw not the woman he loved, but an enemy to be punished. The argument escalated, words giving way to violence. Martin attacked, plunging the knife into Emma's chest, neck, and arms. She fought back, her nails scratching his face, but the wounds, over a dozen in total, were too severe. Emma collapsed, her blood staining the wooden floor, her life slipping away as Martin stood over her, panting, his hands trembling. The aftermath was chaos. Martin, sobered by the sight of Emma's body, fled into the night, leaving the knife behind. He wandered the streets, his mind a fog of panic and guilt, before hiding in a cheap motel on the city's outskirts. Meanwhile, Emma's neighbor, disturbed by the earlier noise, knocked on her door around 10:30 p.m. Receiving no answer, they peered through the broken window and saw her body. The police were called, their sirens piercing the quiet Odense night. Officers arrived to a scene of horror. Emma, lifeless, surrounded by overturned furniture and shattered glass. The brutality of the attack stunned them. Each stab wound a testament to a rage that had consumed both victim and killer. The hunt for Martin Norgard began. Odense was shaken. Emma was beloved, her murder a wound to the city's heart. The media descended, their headlines stark: social workers slain in home, ex-soldiers suspected in brutal killing. Emma's family, devastated, struggled to comprehend the loss. Her younger sister, Freya, spoke at a vigil, her voice breaking. Emma was light. She helped everyone. Why her? The police, under pressure, pieced together the timeline. Neighbors reported seeing a man matching Martin's description, a stocky figure with a shaved head, wearing a military jacket, near Emma's building that evening. Forensic teams found his fingerprints on the knife and traces of his blood from Emma's scratches. Surveillance footage from a nearby shop showed Martin buying whiskey hours before the attack, his face tense, his movements erratic. Martin's military background made him a formidable fugitive, Trained in evasion, he avoided his usual haunts, ditched his phone, and paid cash at the motel. But his unraveling psyche betrayed him. On November 14, a week after the murder, a motel clerk, recognizing Martin from news reports, tipped off the police. Officers surrounded the building, expecting a fight. Instead, Martin surrendered without resistance, his face hollow, his fight gone. In the interrogation room, he was a shadow of the soldier he'd been. I didn't mean to, he mumbled, tears streaming down his face. It just happened. But the evidence told a different story. One of obsession, planning, and a refusal to let Emma go. The investigation revealed the depth of Martin's descent. His apartment was a shrine to his torment. Empty liquor bottles, crumpled letters to Emma, and a journal filled with rants about betrayal and loss. Entries from the weeks before the murder showed his fixation. She thinks she can leave me. She'll see. Psychologists who evaluated him confirmed severe PTSD, compounded by alcohol dependency and untreated depression. Martin's service in Afghanistan had left him with nightmares of roadside bombs and fallen comrades, but he'd rejected help, believing it would tarnish his honor. Emma, in trying to save him, had become a target for his rage. A woman who dared to walk away when he needed her most. The trial, held in 2014, was a somber affair. Odense's courthouse, usually a place of routine, was packed with reporters, veterans, and Emma's loved ones. Martin faced charges of second-degree murder, with prosecutors arguing that his actions, while not premeditated in the legal sense, were driven by a conscious choice to confront Emma with a weapon. They presented the knife, the journal, and Emma's defensive wounds, painting a picture of a man who'd let his pain become a weapon. Martin Norgaard chose to drink, chose to arm himself, chose to break into her home, the prosecutors said. Emma's only crime was loving him. The courtroom was silent as photos of the crime scene flashed on the screen. Emma's blood-soaked apartment, a stark reminder of the violence. The defense leaned on Martin's mental health, calling military psychologists to testify about the toll of PTSD. They described how trauma could distort perception, turning loved ones into perceived threats. Martin was a soldier fighting a war that never ended, his lawyer argued. He wasn't in control that night. They pointed to his remorse, his tears in custody, his willingness to surrender as evidence of a man who wasn't a monster but a victim of his own broken mind. A fellow soldier testified describing Martin's bravery in combat but also his decline. He came back different. The man I knew was gone. The defense pleaded for a manslaughter charge, arguing that life imprisonment would ignore the systemic failure to support veterans. Emma's family, seated in the front row, listened with quiet dignity. Frazier testified, her voice steady but raw. She described Emma's love for life, her dedication to helping others, and the void her death had left. She tried to save him, Frazier said, looking at Martin, and he destroyed her. Martin, for the first time, showed emotion, bowing his head as tears fell. His reaction divided observers. Some saw genuine remorse, others a performance. The prosecution seized on his history of controlling behavior, presenting texts where he threatened Emma after their breakup. "If I can't have you, no one will," one read, sent weeks before the murder. It was a damning glimpse into his mindset. The trial became a flashpoint for broader issues. Denmark, a nation proud of its social safety nets, faced criticism for its handling of veteran mental health. Martin's case exposed gaps in care. Soldiers were offered therapy, but follow-up was inconsistent, and stigma kept many from seeking help. Domestic violence also came under scrutiny. Emma had confided in friends about Martin's volatility, but she'd never reported him, fearing escalation. Advocates argued that better support for victims could have saved her. The media, balancing sympathy for veterans with outrage over the crime, sparked debates about accountability. Was Martin a product of war or a man who chose violence? In August 2014, the verdict was delivered. Martin Norgaard was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 14. The judge acknowledged his PTSD but emphasized his agency. Your trauma does not absolve you. You took a life and you must face the consequences. Emma's family exhaled, their relief tempered by grief. Martin was led away, his eyes fixed on the floor. Outside the courthouse, Freja spoke to reporters. No sentence brings her back, but we hope this helps others see the signs. The crowd, holding candles for Emma, stood in silent solidarity. The aftermath reshaped Odense. Emma's apartment was cleared out, her plants gifted to neighbors. her memory preserved in a community garden named for her. Her family became advocates, pushing for veteran mental health reforms and domestic violence awareness. Denmark's military introduced mandatory counseling for returning soldiers, and hotlines for abuse victims saw increased funding. Martin, now in his 40s, remains in a high-security prison. Reports suggest he's engaged in therapy, showing flickers of remorse, but his progress is slow. Some believe he's grappling with his actions. Others see a man forever trapped in his own darkness. The murder of Emma is a tragedy of missed chances. A woman who loved too fiercely. A soldier who fought the wrong enemy. A system that failed them both. It asks us to look at the invisible wounds of war, the ones that fester in silence until they explode. Martin Norgard was not a villain in the classic sense. He was a man broken by battles he couldn't escape. But his choice to wield a knife. As the rain falls outside, imagine her final moments, her voice pleading in the dark, her strength no match for the blade. Odense moves on, its fairy tale streets quieter now, but Emma's story lingers, a reminder that even in the safest places, the past can cast a deadly shadow. Part 7, The Murder of Sarah Collins, Melbourne, Australia, 2014. In the vibrant, artsy streets of Melbourne, Australia, where coffee shops hum with life and laneways pulse with creativity, a darkness emerged in 2014 that would stain the city's soul. This is the story of Sarah Collins, a 25-year-old sociology student whose bright spirit was extinguished by the man she loved, Matthew Smith. A carpenter with a charming facade, Matthew hid a storm of addiction and rage that consumed everything in its path. What began as a turbulent romance ended in a brutal act of violence, exposing the lethal interplay of untreated mental illness, substance abuse, and domestic abuse. As we delve into this heartbreaking case, prepare to walk a path where love turned to obsession and a single night shattered a family forever. It was April 12, 2014, a cool autumn evening in Melbourne's inner city suburb of Fitzroy. The neighborhood was alive with its usual energy, students laughing in bars, musicians strumming in alleyways, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee. Sarah Collins, a bright and empathetic young woman, was at her apartment, a cozy rental filled with secondhand furniture and sociology textbooks. Known for her infectious smile and fierce dedication to social justice, Sarah was a star at her university, always advocating for the marginalized. Her life was full of promise, but it was shadowed by her relationship with Matthew Smith, a man whose love came with a heavy price. Matthew Smith, 32, was a carpenter by trade, his calloused hands a testament to years of hard work. On the surface, he was charming, tall, with a crooked grin and a quick wit that drew people in. But beneath the facade was a man unraveling. Matthew's life had been marked by instability, a fractured childhood, a string of failed relationships, and a growing dependence on alcohol and drugs. By 2014, his addiction to methamphetamine and whiskey had taken hold, fueling paranoia and violent outbursts. Sarah, who met him at a local pub in 2012, saw glimpses of the man he could be. Kind, creative, capable of deep affection. She believed she could help him, a hope that would prove fatal. Their relationship was a roller coaster from the start. Matthew's charm gave way to jealousy, his affection to control. He'd accuse Sarah of flirting with friends, check her phone, and demand she account for her time. When sober, he'd apologize, showering her with promises to change. Sarah, with her background in sociology, saw his behavior as a product of trauma and addiction, not malice. She urged him to seek help, even booking therapy appointments he rarely kept. Friends warned her to leave, but Sarah's compassion kept her tethered. "He's not a bad person," she'd say. "He's just lost." By early 2014, the abuse had escalated. Shoves began slaps, arguments left bruises. Sarah, increasingly isolated, began to pull away, but Matthew's grip tightened. That April evening, Sarah was alone in her apartment preparing for a study session. She texted a friend earlier, hinting at her plan to end things with Matthew for good. "I can't keep doing this," she wrote. "I deserve better." Matthew, who'd been drinking at a nearby pub, showed up unannounced around 8:00 p.m. He was already intoxicated, his eyes glassy, his voice slurred but edged with menace. Sarah let him in, hoping to talk calmly, but the air was thick with tension. Neighbors later reported hearing raised voices, a pattern they'd grown used to but never acted on. This time, the argument spiraled into something far darker. The details of what happened next came from forensic evidence and Matthew's own fragmented confession. Sarah told him she was done, that she couldn't save him anymore. The words, meant to free her, ignited Matthew's rage. He saw her rejection as a betrayal, a confirmation of his deepest fears, that he was unlovable, unworthy. In a methamphetamine-fueled frenzy, he grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. Sarah tried to flee, but Matthew was faster. He stabbed her repeatedly, 15 wounds across her chest, arms, and neck, each one a release of his pent-up fury. Sarah fought back, her hands bloody from trying to block the blade, but the attack was relentless. She collapsed in the living room, her life draining onto the hardwood floor, her eyes fixed on the man she'd once trusted. Matthew, sobered by the sight of Sarah's body, stood frozen, the knife still in his hand. Panic set in, but not remorse. He cleaned the blade, wiped down surfaces, and fled, leaving Sarah's apartment door ajar. A neighbor, noticing the open door around 10:00 p.m., peeked inside and saw the carnage. The police were called. Their arrival met with a scene of devastation. Sarah, lifeless, surrounded by overturned books and shattered glass from a knocked-over lamp. The brutality shocked even seasoned officers. Her wounds spoke of a rage that had consumed both victim and killer. The murder weapon, a chef's knife from Sarah's own kitchen, was found in a dumpster nearby, stained with her blood. Melbourne was rocked by the news. Sarah was a beloved figure, her death a wound to the city's tight-knit community. The media swarmed, their headlines stark. Students slain in Fitzroy, boyfriend suspected in vicious murder. Sarah's family, devastated, struggled to process the loss. Her mother, Helen, spoke at a press conference, her voice raw. Sarah was our light, always fighting for others. How could he do this? The police launched a manhunt for Matthew, whose face was plastered across news outlets. Witnesses reported seeing him at the pub hours before the murder, his behavior erratic. A friend tipped off police saying Matthew had called him in a panic, mumbling about messing up. The net was closing in. Matthew's attempt to flee was short-lived. He hitchhiked to a rural town outside Melbourne, hiding in a rundown motel. But his distinctive tattoos, a skull on his forearm, a snake on his neck, made him easy to spot. On April 17th, 5 days after the murder, a motel clerk recognized him from a news report and alerted authorities. Police surrounded the building, and Matthew, exhausted and strung out, surrendered without a fight. In custody, he was erect, disheveled, incoherent, his body shaking from withdrawal. "I didn't mean it," he sobbed, but his words rang hollow. The evidence was overwhelming. His fingerprints on the knife, Sarah's blood on his clothes, and a neighbor's testimony placing him at the scene. The investigation peeled back the layers of Matthew's life. His apartment was a chaos of drug paraphernalia, empty bottles, and scribbled notes filled with self-loathing. Friends described a man spiraling. His meth use had escalated, his paranoia alienating everyone but Sarah. Psychologists who evaluated him noted a history of untreated bipolar disorder, exacerbated by substance abuse. Matthew's childhood, marked by an abusive father and a neglectful mother, had left him with deep insecurities, which he masked with bravado. Sarah, with her kindness, became both his salvation and his obsession. Her attempt to leave him shattered the fragile control he clung to, triggering a violent explosion. The trial, held in 2015, was a media frenzy. Melbourne's Supreme Court was packed with reporters, students, and domestic violence advocates. Matthew faced charges of second-degree murder, with prosecutors arguing that his actions, while not premeditated, were the culmination of a pattern of abuse. They presented Sarah's bruises from prior incidents, texts where she expressed fear, and the sheer ferocity of the attack. Matthew Smith chose to arm himself, chose to lash out, chose to kill, the prosecutor said. Sarah's only mistake was believing he could change. Photos of the crime scene with Sarah's blood-soaked apartment silenced the courtroom, a stark reminder of the violence she endured. The defense leaned on Matthew's mental health and addiction, calling experts to testify about the effects of methamphetamine. They described how the drug could induce psychosis, warping judgment and fueling aggression. Matthew was not himself that night, his lawyer argued. He was a man consumed by a chemical storm. They pointed to his remorse, his tears in custody, his confession to police, as evidence of a man who wasn't inherently evil. A childhood friend testified, describing Matthew's early kindness, how he'd once fixed her bike for free. The defense pleaded for manslaughter, arguing that a life sentence ignored the complexity of his struggles. Sarah's family, seated in the front row, listened with quiet strength. Helen testified, her voice steady but heavy with grief. She spoke of Sarah's dreams, to work in policy reform, to travel, to make a difference. She saw the good in him, Helen said, glaring at Matthew, and he used that against her. Matthew, for the first time, showed emotion, his shoulders shaking as he bowed his head. The moment divided observers. Some saw genuine guilt, others a calculated act. The prosecution countered with Sarah's journal, found in her apartment, where she'd written, "I'm scared of him, but I don't know how to leave." The words read aloud hung in the air, a testament to her trapped heart. The trial became a lightning rod for broader issues. Melbourne, a progressive city, faced scrutiny over its response to domestic violence. Sarah had confided in friends, but never sought formal help, fearing stigma or retaliation. Advocates argued that better resources, hotlines, shelters, education could have saved her. Addiction services also came under fire. Matthew's spiral was no secret, yet he'd slipped through the cracks of an overburdened system. The media, balancing sympathy for his struggles with outrage over the crime, sparked debates about responsibility. Was Matthew a victim of his demons, or a man who chose to wield them? In September 2015, the verdict was delivered. Matthew Smith was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison with a non-parole period of 14 years. The judge acknowledged his addiction but emphasized his agency. Your struggles do not excuse your actions. You took a life, and you must face the consequences. Sarah's family exhaled, their relief tempered by loss. Matthew was led away, his eyes fixed on the floor. Outside the courthouse, Helen spoke to reporters. Sarah deserved to live. We'll keep her light alive. The crowd, holding signs reading "End Domestic Violence," stood in silent solidarity. The aftermath reshaped Melbourne. Sarah's apartment was cleared out, her books donated to her university, her memory preserved in a scholarship for social justice students. Her family became advocates, speaking at rallies and pushing for stronger domestic violence laws. Australia's government responded, increasing funding for shelters and addiction programs. Matthew, now in his 40s, remains in a report suggests he's sober and attending therapy, grappling with his actions, but his progress is uncertain. Some believe he's changed, others see a man forever marked by his crime. The murder of Sarah Collins is a tragedy of missed opportunities, a woman who loved too deeply, a man who destroyed what he couldn't control, a system that failed to intervene. It forces us to confront the hidden epidemic of domestic violence, the way it festers behind closed doors. Matthew Smith was not a monster in the classic sense. He was a man broken by addiction and insecurity, who chose violence over redemption. His crime reminds us that love can be a battlefield and the wounds it leaves are often invisible until it's too late. As the rain falls outside, imagine Sarah's final moments, her voice pleading in the dark, her dreams fading with each strike. Melbourne moves on, its laneways buzzing with life, but Sarah's story lingers, a warning that even in the brightest cities, shadows can hide the deadliest truths. Part 8. The Murder of Claire Johnson, Melbourne, Australia, 2014. In the eclectic, bohemian heart of Melbourne, Australia, where street art colors the walls and live music spills into the night, a tragedy unfolded in 2014 that would darken the city's vibrant spirit. This is the story of Claire Johnson, a 27-year-old nurse whose compassion and warmth touched countless lives, only to be snuffed out by the man she hoped to save. Jack Miller, a former boxer with a past scarred by addiction and violence, turned a fleeting moment of rage into a permanent loss. What began as a turbulent relationship ended in a brutal act that exposed the deadly consequences of untreated demons and unchecked abuse. As we venture into this haunting case, prepare to confront a tale of love twisted into obsession, a city shaken, and a family left to pick up the pieces of a shattered dream. It was October 19, 2014, a mild spring evening in Melbourne's Brunswick neighborhood, a hub of hipster cafes and eclectic bars. The streets hummed with life, students sipping craft beer, couples strolling under string lights, the air alive with possibility. Claire Johnson was at her small apartment, a rented space adorned with potted plants and framed photos of her travels. Known for her gentle smile and tireless dedication, Claire was a nurse at a local hospital, often working long shifts to care for patients others overlooked. Her life was a tapestry of kindness, volunteering at shelters, baking for neighbors, dreaming of opening a clinic for the underserved. but her heart carried a heavy burden. Her boyfriend, Jack Miller, a man whose darkness threatened to eclipse her light. Jack Miller, 29, was a former boxer who'd once been a rising star in Melbourne's amateur circuit. Tall and muscular with a boyish grin, he had a charisma that drew people in. But his life was a battlefield. A childhood marked by poverty and an abusive stepfather left him with deep scars, and boxing, while an outlet, couldn't contain his rage. By 2014, Jack was a shadow of his former self, his career derailed by injuries and a growing addiction to methamphetamine and alcohol. The drugs fueled his paranoia, turning his charm into menace. Claire, who met him at a charity event in 2013, saw glimpses of the man beneath the chaos. A soul worth saving, her belief in redemption kept her tethered to him, even as his behavior grew increasingly volatile. Their relationship was a storm from the start. Jack's affection was intense but possessive, his mood swings unpredictable. He'd shower Claire with affection one day, only to lash out the next, accusing her of infidelity or disrespect. His paranoia, amplified by meth, made him controlling. He'd show up at her hospital unannounced, demand she cut ties with friends, and berate her for working late. Claire, trained to see the good in people, believed his promises to change. She researched rehab programs, begged him to seek help, even paid for his therapy sessions. But Jack's addiction was a beast that fed on denial, and his violence escalated. Shoves turned to slaps, arguments left marks. Claire hid with long sleeves. Friends urged her to leave, but Claire's hope, her fatal flaw, kept her bound. That October evening, Claire was home, exhausted after a double shift. She texted a colleague earlier, confiding her plan to end things with Jack. "I can't keep saving him," she wrote. "It's breaking me." Jack, who'd been drinking at a nearby bar, arrived at her apartment around 9 o'clock p.m., uninvited and agitated. He'd snorted meth earlier, his eyes wild, his voice a low growl. Claire, wary but resolute, let him in, hoping to talk calmly. Neighbors later reported hearing raised voices, a familiar sound they dismissed as just another fight. But this time, the argument spiraled into a nightmare, a collision of Claire's strength and Jack's unraveling control. The details of the murder emerged through forensic evidence and Jack's partial confession. Claire told him it was over, that she deserved a life free of fear. Her words, meant to liberate, shattered Jack's fragile ego. In his drug-addled mind, her rejection was a verdict on his worthlessness, a betrayal he couldn't bear. Enraged, he grabbed a knife from Claire's kitchen, a serrated blade she used for cooking. Claire tried to retreat, but Jack's boxer reflexes were too quick. He stabbed her 12 times, the wounds concentrated on her chest and throat, each strike a release of his fury. Claire fought back, her nails leaving scratches on his arms, but the attack was relentless. She collapsed near her couch, her blood soaking the rug, her life fading as Jack stood over her, his breath ragged. The aftermath was a haze for Jack. The meth high crashed, leaving him staring at Claire's body, the knife still in his hand. Unlike a calculated killer, he didn't flee immediately. He sat on the floor, muttering to himself, the reality of his actions sinking in. Around 11 o'clock p.m., he stumbled out, leaving the door ajar, the knife tossed in a nearby alley. A neighbor, disturbed by the earlier shouting, checked on Claire and found her lifeless, surrounded by overturned plants and a shattered photo frame. The police were called. Their arrival met with a scene of devastation. Claire's apartment, once a haven, now a tomb. The ferocity of the wounds shocked officers, each stab a testament to a rage that had consumed both victim and killer. Melbourne reeled. Claire was a beloved figure, her murder a wound to the city's heart. The media swarmed, their headlines stark: nurse slain in brutal attack, boyfriend suspected in Fitzroy killing. Claire's family, shattered, struggled to process the loss. Her older brother, Tom, spoke at a vigil, his voice breaking. Claire was our anchor, always giving. She didn't deserve this. The police launched a manhunt for Jack, whose face dominated news bulletins. Witnesses placed him at the bar hours before, his behavior erratic, his hands shaking as he downed shots. A tip from a former boxing teammate led police to a squat house in Collingwood where Jack was hiding. Jack's attempt to evade capture lasted 3 days. On October 22, a police raid cornered him in the dilapidated house, surrounded by drug paraphernalia and empty bottles. He surrendered without resistance, his body slumped, his eyes hollow. In custody, he was a wreck, strung out, incoherent, his withdrawal symptoms crippling. "I didn't want to hurt her," he mumbled, but the words rang empty. The evidence was damning. His fingerprints on the knife, recovered from the alley. Claire's blood on his jacket, scratches on his arms matching her DNA. Surveillance footage from a nearby shop showed him fleeing her apartment, his face contorted with panic. Jack's world, already crumbling, collapsed under the weight of his actions. The investigation peeled back the layers of Jack's life. His apartment was a chaos of needles, burnt foil, and crumpled bedding slips, a portrait of a man in free fall. Friends described a boxer who'd lost his spark. His injuries ended his career, and drugs filled the void. Psychologists noted a history of depression and borderline personality disorder, worsened by methamphetamine's grip. But Jack's childhood, marked by violence and neglect, left him with a deep-seated need for control, which he exerted over Claire. Her compassion became his lifeline, but also his obsession. When she tried to leave, it triggered a primal fear of abandonment, unleashing the violence he'd always carried. The trial, held in 2015, was a media storm. Melbourne's Supreme Court was packed with reporters, nurses, and domestic violence advocates. Jack faced charges of manslaughter, with prosecutors arguing that his actions, while not premeditated, were the culmination of a pattern of abuse. They presented Claire's medical records showing old bruises and texts where she expressed fear. "He's getting worse. I don't know what to do." The knife wounds, described in graphic detail, silenced the courtroom. Each stab a marker of Jack's rage. "Claire Johnson fought for her life," the prosecutor said. "Her only crime was loving a man who couldn't love her back." Fiction. The defense leaned on Jack's addiction and mental health, calling experts to testify about methamphetamine's effects. They described how the drug could induce psychosis, distorting reality and fueling aggression. Jack was not in control, his lawyer argued. He was a slave to his addiction. They pointed to his lack of flight. He hadn't planned the murder, hadn't covered his tracks, as evidence of a man acting in a drug-fueled haze. A former coach testified, recalling Jack's early promise how he'd once mentored younger boxers. The defense pleaded for leniency, arguing that prison wouldn't address the root causes of his violence. Claire's family, seated in the front row, listened with quiet resolve. Tom testified, his voice steady but raw. He spoke of Claire's selflessness, her habit of singing to patients, her dream of a better world. "She saw the good in him," he said, staring at Jack, "and he betrayed her." Jack, for the first time, showed emotion, his hands trembling as he looked away. The moment split observers. Some saw guilt, others a performance. The prosecution countered with Claire's diary, found in her apartment, where she'd written, "I'm scared he'll hurt me, but I can't abandon him." The words read aloud were a gut punch, a glimpse into her trapped heart. The trial became a rallying cry for change. Melbourne, proud of its progressive ethos, faced criticism over its handling of domestic violence. Claire had confided in colleagues but never sought formal help, fearing judgment or escalation. Advocates argued that better education and support could have saved her. Addiction services also came under scrutiny. Jack's spiral was no secret, yet he'd fallen through the cracks. The media, balancing sympathy for his struggles with outrage over the crime, sparked debates about accountability. Was Jack a victim of his demons, or a man who chose to wield them? In December 2015, the verdict was delivered. Jack Miller was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years in prison with a non-parole period of 10 years. The judge acknowledged his addiction, but emphasized his responsibility. "Your choices led to this tragedy. Claire Johnson's life was not yours to take." The sentence sparked outrage. Many felt it was too lenient, a slap in the face to Claire's memory. Her family, though, accepted it with grace. "No time brings her back," Tom said outside the courthouse. "We just want her story to save others." The crowd, holding signs reading, "Justice for Claire," stood in silent tribute. The aftermath reshaped Melbourne. Claire's apartment was cleared, her plants donated to the hospital, her memory preserved in a foundation for domestic violence survivors. Her family became advocates, speaking at schools and rallies, pushing for stronger laws and better addiction support. Australia's government responded, increasing funding for shelters and rehab programs. Jack, now in his 40s, remains in a Victorian prison. Reports suggest he's sober, attending counseling, but his progress is slow. Some believe he's grappling with his actions. Others see a man forever marked by his crime. The murder of Claire Johnson is a tragedy of what-ifs, a woman who gave too much, a man who took too much, a system that failed to intervene. It forces us to confront the silent epidemic of domestic violence, the way it hides behind closed doors and broken promises. Jack Miller was not a cartoonish villain. He was a man broken by addiction and trauma, who chose violence over redemption. His crime reminds us that love can be a trap, and the scars it leaves are often invisible until they bleed. As the rain falls outside, imagine Claire's final moments, her voice pleading in the dark, her dreams fading with each strike. Melbourne moves on, its streets alive with color, but Claire's story lingers, a warning that even in the brightest places, shadows can hide the deadliest truths. Part 9, The Murder of Emily Parker, San Diego, USA, 2014. In the sun-drenched streets of San Diego, California, where palm trees sway and ocean breezes carry dreams of endless summer, a darkness erupted in 2014 that would shatter a community's sense of peace. This is the story of Emily Parker, a 24-year-old graphic designer whose vibrant spirit was extinguished by the man she trusted most. Travis Cooper, a former soldier, haunted by the ghosts of war, let his untreated trauma spiral into a deadly rage, stealing Emily's life in a moment of unthinkable violence. What began as a love tested by hardship ended in a brutal act that exposed the hidden toll of military service and the devastating cost of ignored cries for help. As we delve into this heart-wrenching case, prepare to confront a tale of betrayal, despair, and a city forced to face the shadows lurking beneath its sunny facade. It was July 15, 2014, a warm evening in San Diego's North Park neighborhood, a trendy enclave of craft breweries, art galleries, and young professionals. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, and the streets buzzed with life. Friends clinking glasses, music drifting from open windows. Emily Parker was in her boyfriend's apartment, a modest rental, filled with her sketches and colorful throw pillows she'd added to make it feel like home. Known for her infectious laugh and creative flair, Emily was a rising star at a local design firm, her portfolio brimming with bold ideas. Her life was a canvas of possibility, but it was shadowed by her relationship with Travis Cooper, a man whose inner battles were tearing them apart. Travis Cooper, 26, was a former Marine who'd served 2 tours in Iraq, returning to civilian life with scars no one could see. Tall and broad-shouldered with a quiet intensity, he'd once been a beacon of discipline, earning medals for bravery. But the war left him fractured, plagued by nightmares, paranoia, and a hair-stringer temper. Diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, in 2012, Travis refused therapy, believing it was a sign of weakness. Alcohol became his escape, and his once steady demeanor gave way to volatility. Emily, who met him at a veterans charity event in 2013, saw the man beneath the pain, a protector, a dreamer, someone worth fighting for. Her love, though, would become her undoing. Their relationship was a fragile dance. Travis could be tender, writing Emily poems or surprising her with beach picnics, but his dark moments were terrifying. He'd wake screaming from nightmares, lash out over small slights, or disappear for days on drinking binges. Emily, with her empathetic heart, researched PTSD, attended support groups, and begged him to seek help. She believed love could heal him, even as his behavior grew erratic. By mid-2014, the strain was unbearable. Travis's paranoia led to accusations of infidelity. His drunken rages left Emily tiptoeing around his moods. Friends urged her to leave, but Emily's hope, her belief in second chances, kept her tethered. "He's not himself," she'd say. "I can't abandon him." That July evening, Emily was at Travis's apartment, planning to spend the night. She'd texted a friend earlier, hinting at her growing fears. "He's drinking again. I don't know how much more I can take." Travis, who'd been at a bar all afternoon, returned home around 8:00 p.m., reeking of whiskey and simmering with agitation. An argument erupted, likely over his drinking or Emily's pleas for him to get help. Neighbors later reported hearing shouts, a woman's voice pleading, followed by a crash. The sounds were muffled by the hum of the city, and no one called the police, a decision that would haunt them. Inside, the argument turned deadly, a collision of Emily's resolve and Travis's unraveling mind. The details of the murder came from forensic evidence and Travis's incoherent statements in custody. Emily, fed up with his refusal to change, told him she was leaving. Her words, meant to reclaim her life, shattered Travis's fragile control. In his alcohol-soaked, PTSD-ravaged mind, her departure was a betrayal, a confirmation of his deepest fear, that he was broken beyond repair. Enraged, he grabbed a combat knife from his dresser, a relic from his Marine days. Emily tried to flee, but Travis's training made him swift. He stabbed her 18 times. Wounds to her chest, arms, and face, each strike a release of his pent-up torment. Emily fought back, her hands bloodied from grasping the blade, but the attack was relentless. She collapsed near the apartment's front door, her blood pooling on the tile, her life fading as Travis stood over her, his mind a fog of rage and regret. The aftermath was chaos. Travis, staring at Emily's body, didn't flee. He dropped the knife, sank to the floor, and drank until he passed out, the bottle still in his hand when police arrived. A neighbor, noticing the open door around 10 o'clock p.m., peeked inside and saw the horror. The police were called, their sirens cutting through the San Diego night. Officers found Travis slumped against the wall, incoherent. Emily's body nearby. The scene was devastating. Her sketches scattered, a broken lamp from her struggle, her blood painting the floor. The ferocity of the wound shocked even seasoned detectives. Each stab a testament to a rage that had consumed both victim and killer. Travis was arrested on the spot, his mumbled apologies drowned out by the weight of his actions. San Diego was stunned. Emily was a beloved figure, her murder a wound to the city's heart. The media swarmed, their headlines stark. Designer slain in North Park, ex-Marine held in brutal killing. Emily's family, devastated, struggled to comprehend the loss. Her mother, Laura, spoke at a press conference, tears streaming. Emily was our joy, always creating beauty. How could he do this? The police investigation moved swiftly. Forensic teams found Travis's fingerprints on the knife, Emily's blood on his clothes, and defensive wounds on her hands. Neighbors confirmed the argument, and bar patrons recalled Travis's drunken rants hours before. The case was airtight, but the motive was a tangle of trauma, addiction, and obsession. Travis's life unraveled under scrutiny. His apartment was a shrine to his decline. Empty liquor bottles, unopened VA letters offering therapy, a journal filled with self-loathing. "I'm a ghost," he'd written weeks before. "She's all I have and I'm losing her." Psychologists diagnosed severe PTSD, compounded by alcohol dependency and untreated depression. Travis's tours in Iraq had left him with memories of ambushes and lost friends, but he'd rejected help, fearing it would tarnish his Marine honor. Emily, in trying to save him, became a target for his rage. A woman who dared to walk away when he needed her most. Her decision to leave triggered a primal fear of abandonment, unleashing the violence he'd buried. The trial, held in 2015, was a media circus. San Diego Superior Court was packed with reporters, veterans, and Emily's loved ones. Travis faced charges of second-degree murder, with prosecutors arguing that his actions, while not premeditated, were the culmination of a pattern of control and rage. They presented the knife, the journal, and Emily's defensive wounds, painting a picture of a man who'd let his trauma become a... Travis Cooper chose to drink, chose to arm himself, chose to kill, the prosecutor said. Emily's only crime was loving him. The courtroom was silent as photos of the crime scene flashed on the screen. Emily's blood-soaked apartment, a stark reminder of the violence she endured. The defense leaned on Travis's mental health, calling military psychologists to testify about PTSD's devastating effects. They described how trauma could distort perception, turning loved ones into perceived threats. Travis was fighting a war in his mind, his lawyer argued. He wasn't in control that night. They pointed to his lack of flight. He hadn't tried to cover his tracks, as evidence of a man acting in a moment of breakdown. A fellow Marina testified, describing Travis's courage in combat, but also his decline. He came back, broken. The man I knew was gone. The defense pleaded for manslaughter, arguing that a life sentence ignored the systemic failure to support veterans. Emily's family, seated in the front row, listened with quiet dignity. Laura testified, her voice steady but raw. She spoke of Emily's creativity, her habit of sketching strangers' smiles, her dream of designing for social good. "She tried to save him," Laura said, looking at Travis, "and he destroyed her." Travis, for the first time, showed emotion, tears streaming as he bowed his head. The moment divided observers. Some saw genuine remorse, others a performance. The prosecution countered with Emily's text to friends sent weeks before. "He scares me, but I feel guilty leaving." The words, read aloud, were a haunting glimpse into her trapped heart. The trial became a flashpoint for broader issues. San Diego, a military hub, faced scrutiny over its support for veterans. Travis's case exposed gaps in care. VA services were available, but wait lists were long and stigma kept many from seeking help. Domestic violence also came under the spotlight. Emily had confided in friends but never reported Travis, fearing escalation or judgment. Advocates argued that better resources could have saved her. The media, balancing sympathy for veterans with outrage over the crime, sparked debates about accountability. Was Travis a product of war or a man who chose violence? In November 2015, the verdict was delivered. Travis Cooper was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison with a non-parole period of 20 years. The judge acknowledged his PTSD but emphasized his agency. Your trauma does not absolve you. You took a life, and you must face the consequences. Emily's family exhaled, their relief tempered by grief. Travis was led away, his eyes fixed on the floor. Outside the courthouse, Laura spoke to reporters. Emily deserved to live. We'll keep her spirit alive. The crowd, holding candles for Emily, stood in silent solidarity. The aftermath reshaped San Diego. Emily's apartment was cleared, her sketches donated to a local gallery, her memory preserved in the Emily Parker Foundation, supporting mental health and veteran care. Her family became advocates, pushing for VA reforms and domestic violence awareness. California's government responded, increasing funding for mental health services and hotlines. Travis, now in his 30s, remains in a state prison. Reports suggest he's engaged in therapy, showing flickers of remorse, but his progress is slow. Some believe he's grappling with his actions. Others see a man forever trapped in his own darkness. The murder of Emily Parker is a tragedy of missed chances. A woman who loved too fiercely, a soldier who fought the wrong enemy, a system that failed them both. It asks us to look at the invisible wounds of war, the ones that fester in silence until they explode. Travis Cooper was not a villain in the classic sense. He was a man broken by battles he couldn't escape. But his choice to wield a knife, to let rage guide his hand, cost Emily her life. As the rain falls outside, imagine her final moments, her voice pleading in the dark, her strength no match for the blade. San Diego moves on, its beaches gleaming, but Emily's story lingers, a reminder that even in the sunniest places, the past can cast a deadly shadow. Part 10, The Murder of Sarah Parker, Cleveland, Ohio, USA, 2014. In the quiet suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, where neat lawns and friendly waves paint a picture of Americana, a senseless act of violence in 2014 shattered the illusion of safety. This is the story of Sarah Parker, a beloved schoolteacher whose warmth touched countless lives, only to be extinguished by a stranger's rage. Michael Freeman, a reclusive man consumed by depression and unresolved trauma, turned a fleeting moment of resentment into a devastating tragedy, leaving a family broken and a community reeling. What drove a man with no prior violence to commit such a heinous act? As we step into this chilling case, prepare to confront a tale of isolation, despair, and a single gunshot that echoed far beyond one suburban street. It was September 16th, 2014, a mild evening in Cleveland's West Park neighborhood, a close-knit area of modest homes and tree-lined streets. The air carried the first hints of autumn, and families were settling into their evening routines. Kids doing homework, parents cooking dinner. Sarah Parker, 38, was outside her home, laughing with her husband David and their two children, Emma and Lucas, ages 10 and 8. A third-grade teacher known for her patience and creativity, Sarah was a pillar of the community, her classroom a haven for young minds. Her life was a tapestry of love, family game nights, volunteering at church, planning a future filled with travel. But that evening, a stranger's darkness would steal it all. Michael Freeman, 34, lived just a block away, a solitary figure rarely seen by neighbors. A former IT technician, he'd grown increasingly withdrawn after losing his job in 2013, his days spent in a cluttered duplex filled with books and empty takeout containers. Michael's life was a spiral of despair. Childhood trauma from an abusive mother, chronic depression, and a recent breakup had left him unmoored. He'd sought therapy sporadically, but his isolation deepened, his resentment festered. To him, the world was a cruel place, and the Parkers' happy home, with its laughter and light, became a mirror to his own misery. On that September evening, their joy triggered something in him. a spark of rage that would ignite a tragedy. The Parkers were in their front yard playing a game of tag with Emma and Lucas, their giggles filling the air. Sarah, her hair tied back, was chasing Lucas when Michael appeared, walking stiffly down the sidewalk. He'd been drinking a half-empty bottle of bourbon in his coat pocket, his mind clouded by a mix of alcohol and antidepressants he'd stopped taking properly. Neighbors later reported seeing him pause, staring at the Parkers, his face twisted with something unreadable. Sarah, ever friendly, noticed him and waved, a small gesture of kindness. But to Michael, it was mockery, a taunt from a world that had rejected him. Without a word, he pulled a .38 revolver from his jacket, a gun he'd bought illegally years earlier, and fired. The first shot struck Sarah in the chest, her laughter turning to a gasp as she fell to the grass. David, reacting on instinct, lunged toward her, but a second shot grazed his arm, sending him stumbling. Emma and Lucas screamed, frozen in terror as Michael fired a third shot, narrowly missing David. The gunfire, sharp and surreal in the quiet suburb, drew neighbors to their windows. Michael, his face blank, lowered the gun and stood there, as if waiting for the world to respond. A neighbor, a retired cop, tackled him, pinning him until police arrived. Sarah lay motionless, her blood staining the lawn, her children's cries piercing the night. David, clutching his wounded arm, crawled to her, begging her to hold on, but it was too late. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Sarah's injuries were fatal. The bullet had pierced her heart. She was pronounced dead at the scene, her family's world collapsing around her body. David, bleeding but coherent, held Emma and Lucas, shielding them from the sight of their mother's lifeless form. Michael was arrested without resistance, his gun confiscated, his bourbon bottle rolling into the gutter. The police, shaken by the randomness of the attack, secured the scene, their flashlights illuminating a yard that had been a place of joy hours earlier. Cleveland, a city no stranger to violence, was stunned by the brutality of a crime with no apparent motive. The community erupted in grief and fear. Sarah was a beloved figure, her murder a wound to West Park's heart. The media descended, their headlines stark. Teacher gunned down in front yard, neighbor held in shocking murder. Sarah's family, devastated, struggled to process the loss. David, his arm bandaged, spoke at a vigil, his voice raw. Sarah was our everything. She made the world better. Why? The police investigation moved swiftly. Forensic teams confirmed the bullets came from Michael's revolver, and his fingerprints were all over the weapon. Neighbors reported his odd behavior in recent months, muttering to himself, glaring at passersby. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed him buying bourbon hours before, his face tense, his hands shaking. Michael's life unraveled under scrutiny. His duplex was a chaos of unpaid bills, moldy dishes, and scribbled notes filled with nihilistic rants. No one sees me, no one cares. Psychologists diagnosed severe depression and borderline personality disorder, worsened by alcohol and inconsistent therapy. Michael's childhood, marked by emotional and physical abuse, left him with a deep-seated sense of worthlessness, which he projected onto others. The Parkers, with their happy family, became a symbol of everything he'd lost. A job, a partner, a purpose. His decision to target Sarah wasn't planned, but a spontaneous eruption of rage, triggered by their laughter and her wave, which he misread as condescension. In custody, Michael was a shell of a man, silent, staring at the floor, offering no explanation. "I don't know why I did it," he mumbled during interrogation, his voice flat. The evidence was overwhelming. Ballistics, witness accounts, and his own lack of an alibi. The police pieced together his movements. He'd walked from his duplex to the Parker Street, the gun already in his pocket, his mind a fog of resentment. The randomness of the attack baffled investigators. Michael had no prior connection to Sarah, no history of violence, no clear motive beyond his own inner turmoil. It was a crime born of a fractured psyche, a man who'd turned his pain outward in a single catastrophic moment. The trial, held in 2015, was a media storm. Cleveland's Cuyahoga County courthouse was packed with reporters, teachers, and grieving neighbors. Michael faced charges of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and child endangerment, with prosecutors arguing that his actions were deliberate and malicious. They presented the gun, the bourbon bottle, and Sarah's autopsy report detailing the precision of the fatal shot. Michael Freeman chose to arm himself, chose to fire, chose to destroy a family, the prosecutor said. Sarah Parker's only crime was living her life. The courtroom was silent as photos of the crime scene flashed on the screen. The blood-stained lawn, Sarah's body covered by a sheet, her children's toys scattered nearby. The defense leaned on Michael's mental health, calling psychiatrists to testify about his depression and trauma. They described how untreated disorders could distort reality, turning innocuous moments into perceived threats. Michael was a man drowning in his own mind, his lawyer argued. He acted in a moment of breakdown, not malice. They pointed to his lack of prior violence and his surrender at the scene as evidence of a man who wasn't a hardened criminal. A former co-worker testified, describing Michael's quiet intelligence, how he'd once fixed her computer with a shy smile. The defense pleaded for a lesser charge, arguing that life imprisonment ignored the need for mental health treatment. Sarah's family, seated in the front row, listened with stoic resolve. David testified, his voice steady but heavy with grief. He spoke of Sarah's love for teaching, her habit of reading bedtime stories, her dream of taking the kids to Paris. "She was our center," he said, glaring at Michael. "You took her from us for nothing." Emma, now 11, wrote a letter read aloud by her father, her words piercing. "Mommy made me feel safe. Now I'm scared all the time." Michael for the first time showed emotion, his hands trembling as he looked away. The moment divided observers. Some saw guilt, others a calculated act. The prosecution countered with a neighbor's testimony, who'd overheard Michael muttering about happy people days before, a chilling hint of his mindset. The trial became a catalyst for broader reckoning. Cleveland, a city grappling with economic decline, faced scrutiny over its mental health services. Michael's case exposed gaps. Therapy was available, but often inaccessible to the uninsured, and follow-up care was spotty. Gun control also came under fire. Michael's illegal revolver, bought on the black market, highlighted the ease of obtaining weapons in the media, balancing sympathy for his struggles with outrage over the crime, sparked debates about responsibility. Was Michael a victim of his illness, or a man who chose to pull the trigger? The Parkers' tragedy became a rallying cry for reform, with vigils across Cleveland demanding change. In October 2015, the verdict was delivered. Michael Freeman was found guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and child endangerment, sentenced to life without parole. The judge, his voice stern, called the crime a betrayal of humanity, condemning Michael's choice to act on his pain. "Sarah Parker's life was not yours to take," he said. The courtroom erupted in applause, a rare outburst of relief. Michael was led away, his face impassive. Outside, David spoke to reporters, his children at his side. "Sarah's love lives in us. We'll heal for her." The crowd, holding signs reading "Forever Sarah," stood in silent tribute. The aftermath reshaped West Park. Sarah's home was sold, her classroom redecorated, but her memory endured in a scholarship for aspiring teachers. David and the kids moved to a new neighborhood, seeking a fresh start, their healing slow but steady. Cleveland responded, increasing funding for mental health clinics and gun buyback programs. Michael, now in his 40s, some believes he's haunted by his actions, others see a man forever lost to his own darkness. The murder of Sarah Parker is a tragedy of senselessness, a woman who gave everything, a man who took everything, a community left to mourn. It forces us to confront the silent epidemic of mental illness, the way it festers in isolation until it explodes. Michael Freeman was not a monster in the classic sense. He was a man broken by pain who chose a gun over help. His crime reminds us that despair can be a weapon and the smallest spark can ignite a catastrophe. As the rain falls outside, imagine Sarah's final moments. Her laughter turning to silence, her family's world collapsing. Cleveland moves on, its suburbs quiet again, but Sarah's story lingers. A warning that even in the safest places, shadows can hide the deadliest truths. As the rain continues to fall, the stories of these 10 lives. Leila, Joanne, Caroline, Priya, Ronaldo, Juliet, Emma, Sarah, Claire, Emily, and Sarah fade into the night, but their echoes remain. Each was a light extinguished by rage, obsession, or despair. Their deaths a reminder of the fragility of safety and the complexity of human darkness. From the forests of Australia to the streets of Paris, from Mumbai's ruins to Cleveland's suburbs, these crimes reveal truths we cannot ignore. That evil often wears a familiar face, that systems fail those who need them most, and that resilience can rise from the ashes of tragedy. Shadows of the Past leaves you with a challenge: to look closer, to listen harder, to see the signs before the shadows deepen. As you drift towards sleep, let the rain wash away the weight of these tales, but carry their lessons forward. The past is never truly gone. It whispers in the choices we make, the lives we touch. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and let the darkness remind you of the light. Good night.